Good morning. Good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Erie. I am Reverend Kristina Church, and it is my pleasure and my privilege to serve all of you and this wonderful community as its minister. I'm so grateful to be here with all of you in the sanctuary and all of you out there in Zoom land today. Thank you for joining us this morning for Invisible Tracks, our service centering voices of Indigenous people in honor of Indigenous Peoples Day. Well, as you heard, I do a lot of walking through my neighborhood, walking my son to school, and what I really love, walking on Presque Isle. It's really one of my spiritual practices at this point. It's also very practical. It's a way to get my dog exercised and get my kid to school and get some exercise for myself. Being outdoors, being present to the beauty of our landscape, being in a place to notice the changing of the seasons, to notice the creatures that come and go, noticing the day that the geese arrive and the day that they leave, has always been an important part of my life. These are the ways that I ground myself in this present moment that we're living in. It's all too easy for me to get really involved in my head and forget that I have a body, and forget that I'm not a separate person, that I'm connected to everything that I see, everything that I experience, that I'm changing all that I experience, and it's changing me. And as I said before, I like to imagine all the invisible tracks on the land as I walk. Sometimes I think about my tracks, like as if my footprints were on a little map, like that map in Harry Potter where, you could see who was walking in the castle at any given moment. You could see the little footsteps. Well, I imagine like a map of my life and everywhere that I've been, and whether I got there by wheels or maybe sled or skating blades or my feet, and just like, what would that map look like, right? I've only been to Presque Isle now about 10 or 12 times, but I imagine some of you have been there maybe hundreds of times, and your tracks have covered each track and made impressions and given your map a really solid line there on the peninsula. And I like to imagine all the other creatures, as I said, those humans and more than human creatures who've traversed in these places before us, on their feet, on horseback maybe, on wagon wheels, slithering on bellies, dragging canoes over the land. And all the winged creatures soaring through the skies that have three-dimensional maps, right? That we have to envision in that way. And even the plants and the fungi have sprouted colonies, and then maybe they've spread, and then they've died back, and so they have tracks in a way too. And all of them have impacted this place, and all of them have made this area of our country what it is today, either by leaving behind a part of themselves, as we talked about earlier, a part that maybe we're breathing in right now, or taking in with our eyes, or maybe some of them we're smelling, and we're taking it in with all of our senses. And so when we leave ourselves behind, all of that goes into this specific place too. And in that way, we can start to understand that we aren't really separate individuals, but we are a part of this ecosystem that's creating the whole of what this place is. And we are becoming, as we go a part of this place, we're becoming the ancestors to those who will come after us. As I become more and more a part of Erie, as I learn to love this place, this sacred place that we are living on, I find that I have this great curiosity about the people who gave their name to our city. The town, the country, the lake, the county, the lake. And so this past Thursday, I devoted almost an entire day to being at the Erie Historical Society and looking into this little mystery of the Erie people, who were also known as the Eries, or the Erie Horon, or the Kakwa, perhaps, or the Chat Sauvage, the wild cat. It's such a mystery that what we don't know about the Eries can fill 7 file folders and a volume of an encyclopedia and several books and several journal articles. And yet, when I left that day, I came away with knowing not a whole lot more than I had when I started. And that's how much of a mystery the Erie people are. And many of you probably know more than I do about this mystery. And I hope you'll share with me some more of what you know. Here's what I learned. We think that the Erie people spoke an Iroquois-related language, so in part of the Iroquois language group, or also known as the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois Confederacy. We believe that through some European writings, some French writings, that they were known in their language and to themselves as the cat people, the people of the cat. But there's a mystery there too, because since the writings were in French, and the French word for raccoon is chat sauvage, which means wild cat, they're not sure whether there were really actually sort of mountain lions or bobcats or lynx in this area that the Erie people took as their symbolic totem animal, or whether it was the raccoon. They suspect it might have been the raccoon because the writings talk about the beautiful tail of the cat that was their totem. And so if you know what a bobcat looks like or a lynx, those are probably out, right? They don't have much of a tail. Maybe a mountain lion, but that's why they suspect that it was the striped tail of the raccoon. So everyone that has written about the Erie, every historian, has come after they have already left this area, because they left the area that we're living in before contact with Europeans. So it is just these sort of unreliable reports from, Jesuits who are traveling through the area and getting stories from other people who remained in the area, other indigenous people. So it's like a secondhand, maybe third-hand description of these people. Now we know that there was some kind of dispute over probably territory, and it was probably with the Seneca people living sort of to the west and north, or east and north of here. East, I guess, for you. And that there was some kind of fight, battle, that it was described as quite violent, and there was loss of life. And the people that lived in this area were driven out by that violence. So we don't know exactly where they went, but there are some reports that they went to the Huron people, that the Huron people took them in to the north and west, right? Is that right? And that the Susquehanna people also were hospitable to them in the south and to the east. So there may be descendants today living among those groups of folks that are related to these ancient Erie people that left about 400 years ago or before. Now, there are some reports that the Erie folks were like a kind of a neutral presence in this area, and that they were known as a point of peace and neutrality in the battles for territory and rights of way and hunting rights and so forth that were engaged in between the groups of Native Americans who lived here. There may or may not have been a queen, which is not really an appropriate term, but that is how the leader, the female leader of the Eries was described by European reporters who, again, were telling these stories long, long after they occurred and reporting them from other people telling them and writing them down. So we don't really know, but they may have had female leadership. They may have appreciated the raccoon as their symbolic animal. They may have appreciated the raccoon's resourcefulness and ability to adapt to different environments and the intelligence and the beauty of the raccoon. We can imagine, but we don't know for sure. And so why should any of this matter to us now, that these ancient people were here and that they vanished and that they lived here, but we don't really know exactly what happened to them? Well, first of all, it's wonderful to know the history of the place that we're traveling on, right, and living on. But beyond that, we have a responsibility to tell the stories, to tell what we know of the stories of the indigenous people who first claimed this land. And part of that reason is that we are learning today that indigenous people were actually wonderful stewards of the land. That when European colonizers and settlers came here, they did not encounter an empty land that was undeveloped, but that actually there were roads, there were footpaths, there was agriculture, there were some cities, there was great management of the resources of the land. In the lakes, in the rivers, and the oceans, there was a lot of knowledge of how ecosystems work and how to maintain them and help them along so that the animals and the plants could thrive and provide a sustainable harvest for generations to come. And so, in a very, very real way, we probably benefit in ways that we can't even imagine from the good land stewardship and water stewardship of those that came before us. It's also true that wild places that are stewarded by indigenous people in this country have greater diversity of plant and animal life even today, even with the great genocide and the decline of indigenous people and the difficulties that they have experienced, they have continued to be beautiful stewards of the land and of the water. So we can say that we owe gratitude to the Erie people for what they did here and how they managed the land, because when Europeans arrived, it was a beautiful, thriving, healthy ecosystem. So we have to be grateful for that. And beyond that, we need to think about the debt that we owe to all indigenous people. Isabel Wilkerson, in her book, Caste, writes a little bit about our position vis-a-vis the people that came before, when she says, "We in the developed world are like homeowners who inherited a house on a piece of land that is beautiful on the outside, but whose soil is unstable loam and rock, heaving and contracting over generations, cracks patched, but the deeper ruptures waved away for decades and centuries. We, in this time, have inherited the genocide of the indigenous people. We have inherited the terrible things that have been done to the land since, and of course, the climate crisis that we are facing. And so, even though when Europeans arrived here, there was a healthy ecosystem, it was thriving, it was sustainable, many of our ancestors, I can say my ancestors, arrived here and forthwith began to overharvest and use the resources in ways that were not sustainable. So we, in this generation, have inherited this house that was once beautiful and has now fallen on rough times, right? And so she says, many people think that they can rightly say, I had nothing to do with how this all started. I have nothing to do with the sins of the past. My ancestors never attacked indigenous people. And yes, of course, not one of us was here when this house was built or when this house fell into decline. But even though our immediate ancestors may have had nothing to do with it, here we are. We are currently occupying a property that has stress cracks and bowed walls and fissures built into the foundation. We are the heirs to whatever is right or wrong with it. We didn't build the uneven pillars, but they are ours to deal with now. Any further deterioration is, in fact, on our hands. And so, as we confront the damage that has been done to soil, to air, to water, we can reach back. We can reach back in gratitude and in curiosity and in learning to appreciate indigenous ways of stewarding the land. And we can humbly learn from their techniques. So, what can we do now to honor the Erie, besides naming our city after them, naming our nearest gigantic body of water after them, naming several counties in this country after them? What can we, who live on the lands that they once occupied and loved and traveled and hunted and fished on, what can we in 2021 do to connect with this vanished and mysterious people? We can tell their story, even though it's only a slim thread. Even if we aren't sure of the details, we know they were here and they mattered. They lived and they moved on this land, and their invisible tracks intersect with ours, probably every single day. So, this may be difficult for us living in Erie to honor and support living Indigenous people, people who are here in our own time. Even though the Erie are gone, the folks who originally called this place home are here no more. We can still reach out to other Indigenous people. We can support them in their struggle. We can learn from them. I know of at least one UU congregation in another part of the country that has decided to make reparations to nearby Indigenous groups on whose ancestral lands their building stands. Because their status as a religious organization exempts them from taxes, they take that money that they would ordinarily be paying in taxes on their property, and they pay that to the tribal organization. Yet another congregation makes a practice of sharing meeting space and other resources with Native groups in their local area, seeking a safe place to hold their gatherings. We can honor the sacred land that was the Erie's home. We can work to cultivate a better relationship with the land, to understand that the earth is indeed our mother, the mother that gives us life. We can deeply engage with the practice of making decisions based on the needs of the people who will be here on this land 7 generations out into the future. Are we doing that now? Maybe not. If we search our hearts, maybe we are not making a full practice of considering 7 generations into the future. As the Erie were violently driven from their homelands, there were people to accept and welcome them to the places that they needed to go. The Huron and the Susquehanna people welcomed them in their duress. Descendants of the Erie, as I said, may live now in the upper Midwest or in eastern parts of Pennsylvania today. So how fitting that here in Erie, we are in a position to welcome people from all over the world who have been violently driven out of their lands, from their ancestral homes, whose stories have been ripped apart by war and other terrors of modern society. Remembering the Erie, we can make a spiritual practice of making this place a peaceful and welcoming refuge for all those whose homes can no longer sustain them. The Erie are no longer here. Their voices, their wisdom, their gifts have been silenced, made invisible. Even their tracks have been made invisible. And so we must cultivate the wisdom that they would have brought to these times had they been able to stay in their homeland. So, my friends, let us resolve here today, anew and afresh, during this week of Indigenous Peoples Day, let us resolve to be continually good stewards of this beautiful place the Erie loved and lived in. Let us continue to cherish the earth that we walk upon, and let us honor those invisible tracks of all those that have made this beautiful place their home. Our closing words as we come to the end of our service are inspired by our ancestors, by Leah Durland Jones. For those who came before us, we offer gratitude and thanks. May their memories be a blessing. May we feel surrounded by their wisdom. As we go from this time and place, let us be inspired by their courage, their care, and their dreams. Let us honor them by doing the work of living boldly, loving mightily, and creating heaven here on earth. Amen, and blessed be.